The 1911 has huge history behind it, most notably being known as the gun that was in 2 world wars. And in this video, I go over the Fusion Firearms Reaction 1911. This video is really kind of to touch on not only this gun, but also if you're new to 1911s, because this was my first move at really diving into not only the single stack 1911 platform, but as well as the 45 ACP round. So there's going to be quite a journey to go along with this, and I'm going to explain later on why I believe if you're new to 1911s and 45 that this gun specifically should be your first one. Now, a little context about me if you haven't seen my channel is that I shoot 2011s fairly extensively in USPSA and IDPA for competition. So I'm not unfamiliar with the platform, and those guns are just the double stack version of a 1911. Now, over the past few years since I've started, I've put well over 100,000 rounds in competition, and I'm to a point now where I kind of want to learn some new things, and one of those is building my first Gunsmith gun, and that's how this came about. And someone recommended Fusion Firearms. And so I dug into their website and started looking around and found that they had plenty of builder's kits available. Now, before you get this gun, all the fitting, whether it's the slide, the frame, the safeties, and even the barrel have already been done for you. So this really is more about assembly. Now, what it doesn't come with are grip panels. So if you want to choose your own grip panels, you have that freedom. And additionally, they do not come with magazines. So you're gonna have to pick up both grip panels and a magazine outside of the purchase of this gun. Touching on one of the reasons why I think you should make this your first 1911, especially the builder's kit, is because it will teach you about all the components, and believe it or not, a 1911 is a very, very simple gun and requires very simple tools to put together. So I've always been a strong believer if you are going to shoot things competitively, or even it's going to be something that you rely on, it's good to know the ins and outs of what you are carrying. Now, not everybody's going to fall in that boat, but as you become a bigger enthusiast on this journey, there's a ton of learning opportunities specifically with this firearm, and I think Fusion does it pretty well. Now, let's briefly talk about the price of it. So I ended up picking this one up from their website on sale, and it was the only one they had in a government length at the time. And I got the kit for $660. Now, because I wanted to add a mag well to it, and it comes with their mainspring housing, I added another $80 to that. Now, the grip panels I got from Lock, which are the aluminum palm swell grips, and that ran me another $100 once it was shipped to me. So all in, we're sitting about $840 for this gun. Now, if you want to get one that's already completed, you have two options. You can go to their website, and as mine is outfitted without maybe the Lock grips and their grips, you're looking about $1,200 when I went and outfitted it. Now, this was the first time, mind you, I understood what the market price of these guns were, because if you go with their 1911 Reaction, if they are in stock at a retailer of some sort, they can go anywhere from as low as $750 up to $900. So in the big picture of it, if you just want this gun, you can certainly purchase it, and for a pretty good deal at that. It is chambered in 45 ACP. Now, the action inside of it is stamped all over the parts, including like your sear, your disconnector, your strut. Even the safeties have a matching number to the rest of this as a hallmark sign to say, hey, this has been fitted to specifically this gun. Now, all the main internal parts, which include like the sear, the disconnector, the hammer, all those things are MIM parts. Now, particularly with this gun and in this price point, I expect that. And as I put this together, shot it, I didn't necessarily see what I would perceive as a lower feel in quality. Now, if you're out there shooting a lot over probably 40, 50,000 rounds on this gun, that's where you'll start to see kind of the value proposition of having the tooled steel parts versus the MIM. But, for most of everybody out there, to keep the price down and obtainable for most people, MIM will do the job. Now moving on to its first impressions. Well, it definitely has that classic 1911 feel to it when you look at the round top and how it is generally shaped, even including the trigger guard, but there are some subtle touches that give it that modern touch. So, for example, you will get these serrations up front, which on this gun are really needed. And because it's chambered in 45, you do got a heavy hammer spring and recoil spring, so having these serrations up front really make life easier. And the safety on this thing is a decent size. It reminds me of my staccato size. If you look here, I'll give you something to compare to here, but this is my staccato P. And so you'll see it's actually about a touch wider and longer than the staccato P, but from a quality perspective and impressions standpoint, this definitely exceeded my expectations, because listen to how audible this is. It's very tactile. It's not going to have that Gunsmith fit quality to it, but if you were new to 1911s, this is the first one you ever experienced, you would definitely say that is definitely nice. Now, the one thing I kind of will harp on really quick here is the edges on the underside of this. I just noticed this as I was pushing this up. They are fairly sharp. So if you notice, I like to do this pushing down with the safety. I'm not one of these people that does this, but most of the time when I'm putting the safety on after I've done a load, I'm pushing up and I really can feel the jagged edge of this right here. The mag release is a fairly standard one you'll see on 1911s. There's nothing extended about it, but it does have a little bit of serration to it and your thumb has good traction against it. Now, I did add the lock palm swell grips. These are aluminum panels, and so I love these because they fill out my hand quite nicely. I have this type of grip style on almost all my competition guns I can fit them on, which include all my Shadow 2s. On this gun, it really sets it off character-wise, because the one thing I've always had a gripe with even 2011s about, and in some single stack 1911s, is they just feel like square in the hands. Now, these palm swells really fill that out well. And there's some decent checkering up front here that is incredibly helpful, especially when you're trying to get your strong hand in here to grip against that. And there's just subtle serrations on the mainspring. Now, the one thing I will say is that the grip safety and the fit of that back in here is acceptable. I would say this is probably a machine fit and not a gunsmith fit, but once it's engaged, it sits in there flush. You know, it's not like on a gunsmith gun, you would see that these sides would be really, really, really tight against here, and even this top right here. That would probably be the biggest difference, but for everybody else out there, you're not going to notice that there's no protruding edges on the side. And as far as it being effective, you know, I never had any issues engaging it. That's nice when these grip safeties have this little hump right here, and it's just enough to overly engage the safety, yet at the same time, it doesn't feel like there's something stuck inside of your hand like some grip safeties I've come across. All right, so the one thing they don't really mention in their description is the slide safety, and I'll show you this and demonstrate. So I have it in slide lock, and I want you to see this now. You 1911, 2011 guys will catch what I do right away. This is actually extended rearward more towards the safety, so I can actually activate that with my right. So showing you as an example, see if you look on my staccato P, you'll see how there's very little gap in between the slider release and safety, versus on the P, there's considerably more. So the traditional way for most 1911s is to actually engage it with your support hand if you're righty and come down like that and get to work. I love this because this is more traditional in the sense of what most guns are today. Just to be able to activate it with my shooting hand is amazing. Probably one of the nicest parts on this particular gun is the barrel itself. If you look on the edge here, you've got some very nice crowning, if I can get that in focus here. But you'll see that there's some nice beveling and crowning on the edges here, and this is a really nice machine piece. Now, the fit of it was excellent. It was already well fitted to the lugs inside the slide, and in terms of it being fit on the rotational part on the links, it was, I would say, perfect. And here's the thing with 1911s and 2011s, you know you have a poorly fit barrel when you can see it in the accuracy. And in terms of verifying that, I could tell you without a doubt, accuracy is not the weak point of this gun. Can't talk it down in 1911 without talking about the trigger, right? When I was looking at this piece, this part right here, the trigger shoe, it feels like a piece of cast aluminum with perhaps like some sort of coating on it. from a perceived value standpoint, it feels kind of cheap, but the interesting part is the trigger bow itself is made out of a machined piece of metal versus a stamped piece of steel. Now, why I mention that is because depending on how well the actual trigger bow is made and finished and as well as polished, that really dictates what you feel in terms of the trigger feel, the engagement against the disconnector and sear, things like that. So it's actually probably one of the nicer parts of this. So walking you through the characteristic of that, okay, so you've just got a touch of pre-travel like normal, but not a lot. So it's a very firm wall and about just over a 4-pound break. Pretty standard for most 1911s. I know my Staccato P comes in at about 4.5 pounds. Okay, so the reset on it. Now here's the thing, if you could see there's a screw here. I haven't adjusted the over travel on it yet, so that's something I can get to, but you'll see that there's quite a bit that I have to go about with when you compare it to most really high-end 2011, 1911s, as you'll see there. But I'm right back on the wall and it's a break. So one more time, pushing it out right here. So it goes out quite a bit and it's a break. So that is the trigger in a nutshell. Okay, so the sights on these, at first I wasn't a fan of them, but I started to like them more because this is more target oriented because you have this white fiber front sight, which was new for me to see, and as I prefer the orange, red, or even green. But when I actually went to go use it and look through the rear sights of it, they're blacked out, which I prefer. And they have a very short notch in here, so that's more intended for target shooting. And I could verify that at 15 yards, this thing was dead nuts accurate, and I'll expand on that just here shortly. Now, if you decide that you want to change the sights, like I probably would go with like some Ken sights. They are Novak cut, so you can at any time push those out, and there are a lot of sights and options based on that cut. Now this magwell is something you can add on as an option, and I certainly took advantage of that. Now interestingly enough, you still want to take a look at the frame, and it's kind of hard to see from here, but you'll see there is actually some beveling built into both sides of this. So from the factory, the frame has naturally beveling built into it. But single stacks usually make me nervous because they feel awkward to reload. So having this magwell is nice. It's considering the size of it, it's actually gigantic for what the application calls for. And it doesn't sit like flush like you would see on some maybe Gunsmith fit type of magwells, but it certainly does the job. And you'll even see the protrusion here on the rear side of the frame. That really kind of is more to help it from over insertion. So it definitely does the job. Mine is just a touch loose. But the one thing I will say I appreciate it aesthetically is how well it lines up with my grip panel. If you look here around the rear very closely, it's just sitting there nice and flush. And because I got this cut for a magwell, and that's an option when you order the locks, is it just fits in there so nicely. So I believe this really completes the look of this gun. Now this gun is not particularly anything out of the ordinary for a government 1911. This is just the standard one I use, fit for a 5-inch government slide, as you see here from Comptac. And you know, you may have to, I had to loosen it up just a touch for my preference, but it goes right in there. And this is what I shot the competition with, was this holster and setup right here. So if you are looking for holster options, you can certainly default to the thought of going with the standard government size holster. Now we're briefly going to touch on what I did to assemble this gun, and as well as most importantly, the shooting experience. Now before I do that, I ask that if you've liked this video, please hit that like button, as that really helps me a lot. And you're going to want to subscribe because my journey continues, as I've already purchased a Caspian slide-in frame and all the parts to build my first Gunsmith gun. So you're gonna want to subscribe because I'm very familiar with 1911s and 2011s. What I decided to do is have a little bit of fun. So I like to do reverse sear ribeyes. I had to set the grill so I could finish it up with reverse sear. Now that typically takes anywhere from 12 to 15 minutes to get up to temperature. And so beforehand, I had already set this up on my table and made myself a challenge after I'd pulled the steaks out that I'd run upstairs and put this together. And in about 12 minutes or so, I had this thing together and at least ready to dry fire, as you can see here. And it gave me plenty of time to come back and finish that reverse sear. So what does that mean to you? Well, the good news is all the guns that have been fitted to this do fit the first time, and this gun was fairly easy to put together with simple tools too at that. So if you are new to putting guns together, things like that, this is a really good platform to learn on, and there's plenty of tutorials out there on how to do this for a 1911. I actually had to make sure it fired. And so after a match one night, I actually took it to the range and I put the first 32 rounds through it and it was good to go. In fact, I was actually very surprised how accurate this gun was right out of the box, because really my only experience with 45 ACP and a 1911 has been my CMP 1911, which shoots all over the place because it's just in general an old gun with a fitted barrel set to what is acceptable to shoot at. The very next night, I decided to sign up for another local IDPA match, and it happened to be the ideal match to test this gun in because it had all sorts of odd starts and stage plans that really not only tested my ability as a shooter, but tested this gun as well. I actually had to shoot this gun from retention. I had to do a whole stage weak hand, and as well as there were a ton of precision targets with high risk attached to it. Now, I'm not familiar fully with the CDP rules, but all that said, I ended up shooting the entire night 3 down. I was surprised at how accurate and precise this gun was. And it's funny too, because that was also my real first experience of understanding the dynamics of how this gun likes to behave and shoot. The reloads for me, especially when you look at these tall skinny mags, usually they feel awkward going in, especially in dry fire. But when I ran the match, this gun, it was just easy to throw mags inside of it and go to work. Now, we cannot do review on my channel without doing the formal testing. And this was a humbling experience for me, because I started out with an accuracy drill where I set up a target at 15 yards, and in this case I only decided to throw 8 rounds, but I just want to check the precision of it. So this is all slow fire stuff, and as you can see, I was able to produce some really tight groups at 15 yards. Sights aren't the most visible, but they work. All right. The next drill I ended up doing was my doubles drill. Now in that drill, I set up a target at 10 yards, which is an IPSC target. And the idea of that is to see what kind of splits I can get with the grouping. But what this feels like is that you get an initial concussion in the hands and the muzzle does rise quite a bit, but the spring in the way that 1911s are set up absorbs that very quickly. Typically they have heavier slides, so the action of this thing moving back and forth is a touch slower. When it starts to return, it's actually fairly gentle, so the follow-up shots actually happen quicker than you think, especially if you have an ideal grip on this. So my first set out, I was doing about 30 splits and producing a solid group. And the way I'm programmed to feel recoil, I felt that I would be pushing it if I went faster. And the next component of that is I decided to speed this up. And I was surprised because I was doing about 23 splits on average and still producing a solid group, as you can see here. Now the next drill I run is my 25-yard bill drill. And what I do is just pick it up from the barrel and I defeat the safety and I just shoot 6 rounds at an IDPA target 25 yards away. Now, if you've seen my other videos, usually really precise and fast firing guns, I do very well on this. I even do well with fairly stock 9mm guns on this drill as well. Well, I can't tell you why, because I'm able to squeeze accuracy out of it 15 yards in, but I struggled on this drill. And I'll admit that too, because I think one thing I will do is I'll do a comparison video against maybe another 45 caliber gun, and I want to learn how I can actually tighten that group up, because I know I'm capable of it, but that was part of the learning experience. Now, for the final drill, this is where you see a lot of my experience is in my transition drill. And what I do here is I start on steel at about 10 yards, and then I transition to a paper target that's 20 yards and back to steel. And I repeat this and you'll see that I have cascading paper targets that start at 20, go to 15 and 10, and I end on the steel. So this is a 10 round drill. Now this is where this gun's general performance made up for it, because as long as I respected the targets when I swung onto them, I was rewarded with good hits, as you'll see here. And for fun, I actually went haywire with it one time and actually pulled times similar to what you would see on some of my more tuned guns, which was under 5 seconds. Now for me, I was on par with the performance that I had with the Langdon Tactical PX4 Storm, and as well as the all-new 365 Fuse. So the performance is there and you can extrapolate that. I will say that I felt confident driving this drill, especially even with this type of round. The balance of this gun is amazing. I wouldn't characterize as good or neutral. Like, the weight of this thing really balances out towards the trigger. And so swinging this gun around just made me feel confident, because the ergonomics largely coming from the lock grips on this and the weight of this gun just made it so much fun to shoot. This is a really well set up gun for this. Last thing I'll touch on is reliability. I put about 400 or 500 rounds or so through this gun. One thing I was surprised about, because I know how temperamental my Kimber 1911 used to be, this gun was the exact opposite. Now, I'm already programmed to put oil in my guns quite a bit, but I didn't really have to put a ton of oil on it. I didn't find that there was a break-in period necessary, and I was running a Winchester 230 through it the whole time, so fairly hot ammo. This gun just kept performing and going with zero hiccup. I've had some experiences where I'm kind of programmed to have red flags when I see one priced under $2,000, but I think this gun reset my expectations, because this gun was not only reliable and easy to put together and live with, but it performed. And so this really changed my perspective of what you can do with maybe a budget conscious type of 1911. And this is why I think this should be your first 1911, as well as maybe even if you're new to 45 ACP, because what you don't want to have when you are trying to learn things is an unreliable gun and a gun that's temperamental. And this gun is the exact opposite of that.
Man, that is an accurate gun. I love this thing. I love this thing. I love this thing.
And that's all I have for you guys. You're gonna wanna kind of stick around and see what I end up with that Caspian build. Until next time, guys, put some rounds down range, have fun, and we will see you at the range.